So the thing we usually do, if it works, you never know. Okay, going to do this. Here we go. So here's our business that we are working with. Warren Ellis, Crécy. This comic came out, what was it? Well, it says right here.
Did it say 2007? Yeah.
07, yeah. So we're talking about Warren Ellis. Yeah, the story Warren Ellis artwork. Raulo Caceres, I'm gonna guess. Now, there's a lot to talk about. Certainly we'll talk about the content. I just thought, yeah, this is just knockout art from someone I've never heard of. I've never heard of this guy, and I was just astounded by somebody I just never heard of. But we can talk about that later.
Matalia's friend said this would involve a lot of work.
Yeah, look at that. Just the pen and ink on it. And this was definitely pen and ink. I mean, just the detail and the.
And this isn't copying photographs either.
No. I mean, for goodness sake. I mean, again, an artist I've never heard of. I've never heard of this guy. And look at this. Look at this. I mean, it brings to mind some of the greats from EC Comics, like Krigstein or someone like that. Some of the great, like, the Frontline Combat and Two-Fisted Tales that we looked at a few months ago. This is, I think, the equivalent of that. I mean, just amazing work. Just amazing work. Really.
There's a warning here. Political correctness does not win wars.
Yeah. So, yeah, sure. Let's talk about the content. This is the Battle of Crécy. I guess it's just Crécy. That's how it's pronounced. Yeah, I didn't know much about it myself, so I'm glad to have learned the details of this. Apparently, a very pivotal battle in European history.
Well, it's had an element in it which is seen going way back to Hannibal. And you got the smaller army. It's not always a disadvantage. The trouble with the bigger army is they can be clumsier. And they have, as I think it's in the story in Hannibal, that big armies have almost a momentum that cannot be stopped. And they will tend to walk in traps. They just can't help themselves. And this is expressed again in this story. You want to know how to beat a big army? Plant yourself on a suitable piece of terrain, which makes things difficult for the bigger army. And the clincher will have an irresistible urge to try and squash you. Whereas it might have been better to, come back another day.
It is amazing. This is kind of like a David and Goliath story, isn't it? Because, yeah, they were the scruffy underdogs who came up against a much superior, more sophisticated force and prevailed.
Well, I was trying to get Matali to understand an old term we don't hear much anymore. They're all dogs' bodies.
Yeah, but they say, the one thing you cannot do is you cannot really truly defeat a guerrilla army. Guerrilla armies just will defeat you every time. So, yeah, I mean, clearly, our main character here, our main soldier guy, crossbowman here, he couldn't possibly be actually saying or thinking any of these things. Clearly, this is a modern Warren Ellis, using him as a mouthpiece. I mean, it's, breaking the fourth wall. He's obviously knows he's narrating for the benefit of us, the audience. I like it for that reason. I think this is, you've been here long enough. You hear me talk about this continually. I like it when a comic does something that only a comic does. And I think this is one of those. I don't think you could adapt this accurately into a film, into an animated film, into a TV thing, or a prose story. It had to be a comic. It only works as a comic. Nothing else would work this way, with the main character narrating in this way and showing all the things that he's showing us and telling us. This is a comic through and through, and that's makes use of the medium, and it can only be presented in this medium. It would be a different thing if it were presented in a different medium. And I always appreciate that. The main character is obviously just giving us a narrative of the battle, of the history and the situation. He's basically just a narrator for our benefit.
My name's William of Stonham. This is a story about an English and the French,
Right.
and why the English hate the French, which is because they eat frogs. They smell bad and they're 25 miles away. I am, of course, a complete bloody xenophobe who comes from a time when it was acceptable to treat people in the next village like they were subhumans.
Yeah. Yeah, Ellis makes no bones about where he's falling on the politics of this. He's clearly has his particular axis to grind, and that's fine.
The French, though, you can't deny this. They rounded out the English language, as you probably all know. The English language is a two-part language. I'm trying to think of the word.
It's actually unusual.
Had Anglo-Saxon prior to the Norman invasion, and the Norman invasion integrated early French, which is a derivative of Latin, as we probably all know, into English, and gave us one pretty superb language. Yeah, I think.
Hang on there, superb.
Where would we be without the Norman invasion, language-wise? I don't know. Just Anglo-Saxon?
Well, actually, it's an unusual factor is that the language of the king will tend to dominate. It's unusual that possibly that the English didn't end up speaking completely French. This is a weird bit. Like Scotland's an example. The spot where the state where Edinburgh is actually spoke a variety of the Anglo-Saxon languages.
Mm-hmm.
And Scotland, as we know, originally spoke Pictish, which was a type of Welsh, which got overran by Gaelic. But when the king ended up speaking a variety of English, so English spread over most of Scotland. So somehow, yeah, this is a case where the French didn't become the dominant language, which actually would have been pretty useful since you could, you had a load of French on the other side of the channel. If you spoke the same language, it would have been easier. But in panel number 5, I mean page number 5, the interesting point about prostitution, that prostitution used to be widespread before the Puritans came along. So you had places like Cunt Road and Rope Cunt Lane, which he's claiming this comic used to be the local relief spots where if you felt the urge. The interesting thing, this is where I was arguing with Natalia when she's looking into the past, but in societies in the past, they didn't view rape fondly. You know, if you're in a Roman town or something, like rape wasn't going to make you popular, because their attitude was it was easily available at the price. If you had the urge, there was plenty of accommodating women around who would do it for a price. And so you find we'll have a look through the some of the religious edicts and so on. But I was trying to find out what the Roman laws on rape were. But they talked about crushing your testicles with a rock.
Mm.
The Romans would do this.
Yeah. They didn't take kindly to rape in these ancient societies. We seem to think there seems to be this story going around that they were cool with it. They weren't.
I think there were prostitutions in temples as well, right? It was considered sacred or something. I didn't. Yeah.
That's the high class prostitution. I'm not in that market. It's too expensive. You can have a high class prostitute today. You might pay 10,000 for a night.
Oh, I didn't know it was high class.
Well, that's what you could be aiming at. You know.
I wonder which god or goddess that the prostitutes display their bodies to. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't know how it works though. Maybe.
I don't know either.
I haven't done enough research.
All right. The Normans. Oh, yeah, number 8, the Normans. Okay. That was a good one.
Yeah, so I guess there's a lot to be said for the reason why a lot of battle tactics and battle strategies, techniques changed as a direct result of this battle.
Well, it was a time this was a time in Europe when the cavalry had reigned supreme for 1,000 years. We know in the Greco-Roman times that the infantrymen had been a big number, but at the very end of the Roman Empire, for some reason, cavalry dominated so completely that the infantry were considered purely for garrison work. And then somehow the infantryman who could stand up and face cavalry was making a comeback, not just with English longbowmen, but Flemish spearmen. So well-ordered, well-trained infantry could stop knights. Swiss were starting to show up around this time with their halberders and then their pikemen. And eventually we see a renaissance of the pike, which had disappeared since the time of the Greeks. So why does this happen? Why did the pike go out of fashion, and why did it come back into fashion? Ultimately, the pike formation was only defeated in early modern times by the use of light field artillery. Since it was such a massive formation, it was a desperately bad target for a cannonball. Yes. You'll have heard of the Norman invasion. Some people will have you believe that the Normans weren't quite French. The Normans being tall, blondes, blue-eyed bastards from Normandy. What you get when Vikings fuck French women, instead of eating them or turning them into boats. Which is sort of like getting wolves to crossbreed with snakes. Oh, well, he's really letting go here, isn't he? Oh, he just keeps on going. But actually, the Normans generally weren't fair-haired because their mothers were French. The Normans, although they were fairly large and powerful like Vikings, tended to have dark hair.
Well,
Vikings sure got around, didn't they? I mean, England, then they made their way over across the Atlantic. Some say they discovered, I mean, not to go off on a tangent, some say they were the true discoverers of America. Yeah, Eric the Red, and then Leif Erikson. I don't know, it's from my history books from grade school.
If you find yourself a big map and then you look at the Viking travels over the few centuries, yeah, quite some distance. You know, in my childhood, you just think Vikings, well, people that just raided Britain overnight to make all the peasants unhappy. But yeah, they did range quite a distance. It created the Russian state, which was impressive.
The Vikings created or helped create the Russian state, the Russian country of Russia.
Yeah, it was actually Rus was the name the Finns called the Swedes. That's what the name.
Wow.
You get all these wonderful legends. You don't know how true it was, but the Vikings sailed up and down the rivers and eventually set up trading posts and started to dominate the territory around them. One story has it that they were successful. They invaded, took over, and were driven out. And then the Slavs wanted them to return because they found that the Vikings actually kept law and order better. So there's certain similarities to the Romans, I suppose you say. Vikings were a franchise, not a racial group. It was a lifestyle which they franchised out. You know, it's like a medieval chronicler pointed out how the Vikings kidnapped Irish children. Some they used as pure slaves, others that were strong enough were trained to be warriors because they didn't have large numbers. With the medieval chronicler saying, well, when it actually came to it, the Irish Vikings are a bit nastier than the ones from Scandinavia. So this is why they spread so far, that they absorbed other peoples to make up for numbers. If a rower died, simple, stop at a village somewhere and invite somebody to come on board.
Wait, you said before that the French women have dark hair and dark eyes, right? But generally, but in Gaul, a name before France, weren't there like a huge number?
Oh, yes, there's a lot of fair women in the Gallic region, that's true. But the base of the population, as with Britain and Spain, is Mediterranean.
Oh, right. Okay. Iberian. Yeah.
Yeah. Nordics have invaded Britain and France, but the base population, they were originally people from the Middle East who brought agriculture into Europe. Mm-hmm. And they originally were more olive skin, but they became pale skin after several thousand years in Europe.
Okay. I see.
Okay, on page number 9, bit of homely wisdom here. If you keep on being their cunts, they'll keep on fucking you. Oh well. Remember, you can put that one up on your wall.
I wish I had read this.
Well, I can pick up the download, I suppose. Where is it?
Yeah, it's a good comic. I mean, yeah, does what it needs to do. It explains the the history of the subject, the battle.
Right.
Does it very well. Does it very artfully. Yeah, I liked it. Yeah,
I think one here.
presented
Sorry.
the information very in a very engaging way, involving way, and entertaining, and certainly, and kept your attention throughout. Okay, I'm done.
Oh, it's my favourite. Favourite is doing historical subjects, especially war and disasters. I like disasters too in comics, because look at this. What does the comic? What can the comic book artist? And this is the most important thing in the comic book art, is he can create the expression. The photograph can be a little bit blank. You can get a nice expression in the photograph, but not always. But the comic book artist can always, or the artist can always capture the expression he wants. Interesting bit of historical information there was keeping your string dry. I noticed he points out the writer's done a little bit of historical research. I'd say the cartoonist is not so aware. But the writer points out, of course, that, I didn't think of this, that the crossbowmen, the French crossbowmen, or Genoese crossbowmen, would have a hell of a time unstringing their crossbows. And this is the trouble. When the strings of that era got wet, they became useless. Whereas the English crossbowman could easily, the English bowman could easily string his bow when conditions were right. And he could carry spare strings. Some say that this was the beginning of the era of nationalism. This is where the kings were starting to appeal to the nationalism of their native populations, where prior to this it was purely class. If you were a peasant, you're on a completely different level than the nobility.
It was interesting. Sorry.
Go on.
It was interesting when the guy, what's his name, William, well, he said that the French don't actually have low class men in their ranks, like the peasants carrying the bow. I forgot what page that is. Maybe it's 17 or 18.
The French did have infantry, not quite. They didn't have longbow. And they did try at one stage. The French got the idea that they'll use the longbow against the English. But they came to the conclusion that if they armed their peasants would become more dangerous than the English, because there was an element that because the English were armed and dangerous, that they had better rights in law than the European peasantry did, because weapons talk. And it's like the American Constitution. You will not preserve your freedoms unless you're capable of doing something nasty to your rulers.
That's why everybody, every other American owns a gun.
Oh, of course, that's a tradition. That was actually an English law in, even in Tudor times. There was a law that every free Englishman had to carry arms.
Really?
Yeah, well, this was a whole thing, that England was that place which continued the tradition that an armed populace can be used by the king to defend the nation. Other places, they tended to use nobility or professionals. I'm not too sure about the French. The French did have infantry, not just the crossbowmen. They also had men that carried, what do you call them, those pole arms, trying to think of the name, halberds. They had halberdmen as well. Possibly they were paid, but as far as I know, the French didn't really mobilise the peasantry, even though I think the laws allowed them to.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the infantry, the peasant infantry that the French did bring with them, wasn't that great. Whereas the English longbowmen, well, this is an interesting thing. People forget that England must have had at least 250,000 men training as longbowmen every Sunday. Maybe more, maybe 500,000. And what can the king do? The king doesn't have to take just a cross trend of them. He can pick the best. He can say, I'm going to pay. They did pay the longbowmen on service in France. And so basically the longbowmen were hired, and they're probably picking on skill. You look big enough. Generally, it took a fairly large man to use the longbow. But I don't know if that was absolutely the rule. They took a lot of Welsh with them, and the Welsh weren't known for height. They paid the English longbowmen 4p a day and the Welsh longbowmen 3p a day, which, when the typical wage in that time might be 1p a day. So you're earning 4 times what you normally would on the land. And there was plunder.
Were there any farmers that were trained with the longbow?
Yeah, well, that's what the English were. They were yeomen, upper class farmers. So they were freemen, and all free men, all people who weren't serfs or slaves, had to practice with the longbow.
Okay.
Of course, England is a place which ends up having a House of Commons in just before this time. Actually, the House of Commons was created prior to Edward III reaching his majority. That's because I think it was Mortimer, who was the dictator of England at the time, thought the House of Commons would benefit his rule. And they kept it up. So
yeah, certainly very, very impressive work on the Warren Ellis's part. Did certainly a great deal of research for this. Very impressive.
the French king is lamenting my point there, where he's saying it would have been smarter not to fight the English this way, more or less, he's saying, but my nobles wanted to have a fight and I let them.
Yeah.
It's not, you don't win wars that way, or battles. You win by doing the smart thing. You win actually by making less mistakes than your opponent, because you always make mistakes. But the trick is to avoid making mistakes. Okay, very nice shot of the background sky there.
This one over here.
Yeah, one you just scrolled down from. That's before the dark. So yeah, you got sort of clouds rolling across there. There you are, very nice. Sort of a bit reminiscent of the old woodcut, isn't it? In certain places.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Wonderful, wonderful ink work, really. Yeah, this guy's good. This guy's very talented.
Well,
Again,
you could stick
heard of him.
that one up on your wall.
This guy's got some chops. I mean, hope he continues to work. Sometimes you see great comics artist talents and they do one good thing and then they're gone. It sometimes happens and then you never hear from them again. Yeah, very good work. Very good work. Not just detailed, but you know, good composition, good flow, good dynamics, good energy, good emotion getting across. You know, not every comics artist has this much talent as this guy.
He's got a style what you'd call a semi-gritty style. Yeah, I was discussing it with a friend earlier, like comic style, right? And well, since I'm working on one as well, but it's about the Roman, the persecution of the pagans in the fourth century. Well, he looked at the intro and which I'll probably show you later. And he said, I don't think you can do like a semi-gritty style under like 15-20 minutes. It's very time consuming. Although he personally thought that comics are more effective in black and white, according to him. There's more like a sense of fluidity there, which I wonder about. Yeah. Still confused whether I want to keep my comic monochromatic, which I mean like black and white or just with color.
Well, Metalia's artwork has a nice flow to it, but it's going to depend very heavily on its story.
Yeah.
Do what's best for the work. Always. Do what the
Although
work
I
calls
worry,
for.
yeah, I like drawing characters, and I don't think I have a big problem with that. But like with buildings and sceneries, I still need a lot of practice. And coloring them, I don't know if it will be a hassle.
Yeah. Do what the work calls for. So
there's a lovely scene, a field of dead Frenchmen.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things when you read these historical comics, you kind of get the sense of what it must have been like if you were actually there at the time. And of course, there's no way to know for sure, but you know, just imagining, what it might have been like and felt like to be in these places.
Well, there's an exaggeration going on here, though, where he's saying, 30,000 died.
Yeah.
Well, they claim the French army was 20 to 30,000 strong, and they claim the loss of at least 4,000. So it was a fairly heavy toll that put against the English losses were minimal, no more than 200.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, quite remarkable. Yeah, they had no business doing as well and even winning this battle, and yet they clearly did. They were just, yeah, as you said, they made fewer mistakes.
Who was there? The British, the English. Who was their general or leader in this battle?
Well, this was King Edward, wasn't it? One of the King Edwards.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. So all in all, this is a good comic, worthy read. You know, I'm not sure I'd put it on my greatest of all time list. I don't think I'd put it on, greatest, I don't know, 200 or 300 comics I've ever read, but certainly worthy comic to read. Not that long, 45 pages. Yeah, good work by Warren Ellis. I recommend. You know what? I'll give it 9 out of 10 stars. 9 out of 10.
Well, I suppose here the power that's expressed in the artwork's meant to draw you in. And that's ultimately a good comic has to draw you in. You can't, a comic that repels you or disinterests you isn't working.
Yeah, has to be at a minimum entertaining. You're just not going to continue with it at all.
Oh, you can create the most perfect art forms in the world, but unless they draw you in, they're just not going to work. Well, Edward III was the reigning monarch.
Yeah.
But from what I gathered, he didn't take part. He was in the back line. It was his son, the famed Black Prince, who was in the front line, because Edward told the Black Prince, get tough. That's what it takes to be a king. Of course, the funny thing is, Edward III outlived his son, the Black Prince. The son died just before the father. And Edward III was a long-lived monarch. But Edward III was the one who broke with the French tradition and started to see himself as a king of the English. Of course, that was it. Of course, the first Edward had started those wars against Scotland, which we have in Braveheart.